when a referendum like Brexit, where I voted Remain, by the way, equivalent vote for Hillary in 2016, and Francis did too as well, we both did. When the explanation for that was being offered to us was that half the country was, I was just like, no, this is BS. This isn't true. And that, I think, is part of the reason that we really started to look at these things, because we felt our own industry change. And also we looked around at society and we just went, something is off. We're being told a bunch of lies. And quite nasty ones as well. You know, for Francis particularly, you know, his father is a evil straight white man who married a woman from Venezuela in the 80s, when that was not the done thing in England. And he voted Brexit, and he was suddenly demonized. And that picture of our societies is so inaccurate that it was very frustrating. And I think trigonometry is partly born out of that frustration.
I'm Dave Rubin, and we are at the local studio here in Miami. And joining me today is the co-host of the Trigernometry podcast and author of An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, Konstantin Kisin. Konstantin, this is bizarre that we have never met in person before.
And it is awesome that we now have.
We have. What should we do now?
Let's talk.
Let's talk about stuff. Okay. I think some people sort of think you are like the British version of me in a way. So what's the deal?
Well, I have a sidekick.
Give me a little history.
Listen, I'll be honest with you, man. I'm going to spill the beans. I used to watch your show religiously, particularly 2017, 2018.
Those crazy formative years.
Yeah, and I thought what you were doing was incredible. And you showed what was possible for somebody who is independent-minded, who wanted to come in and, you know, interview interesting people from a position of perhaps not knowing very much. And so I said to my buddy Francis, why don't we do something like this? It's genuinely seeing you and Joe, you know, have these conversations was an incredible influence. And so I'm delighted to be here with you.
Well, I'm glad that you are. Was nobody really doing that in the UK yet? The more independent-minded stuff? Obviously, there's a gajillion chat shows, and the UK has a long history of long-form interviews and that kind of thing. Yeah,
I can't think of the top. There are other people who have slightly different conversations, but I think that mix of levity with seriousness, and that is something that it's kind of interesting, because we're both former stand-ups.
Yeah.
And Francis still does stand-up, and I think that gives you something, because you've always got a way to release tension if you need to. And for us, that's been very important, because, you know, we interviewed a woman, Dr. Ella Hill, who's a survivor of one of these grooming gangs. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
And we interviewed her for an hour, and this isn't really anything to do with us, but nonetheless, it's an interview about a victim of the most heinous crimes, which is funny. It's funny. Right, and that, I think, is the magic sauce.
Was she ready to be funny about it?
Yeah, it's all down to her. We were just able to play along. That's all.
Yeah. So you're out of the stand-up game, huh?
Yeah. I hated the lifestyle. I enjoyed being on stage, but driving around for hours and all of that.
That's funny, because for me too, I loved doing stand-up, and you know, I do gigs still here and there and book tours and that kind of thing. It was never the being on stage or being at the comedy clubs. It was everything else. It was the life that it could lead to that I couldn't deal with, which I think is why so many comics end up on drugs or dead, basically.
Look, there are harder lives, obviously, than standing in front of people and talking.
Working in rice fields, maybe.
You know, getting home at 2 a.m., waking up at 10 the next day is just not. I can't do it. And now you and I both are fathers, so it's not for me. When lockdown happened in the UK, it forced me to really evaluate it. And my wife, we've been married for 20 years. We have the most beautiful relationship. But I was working so hard, because we were trying to get trigonometry off the ground. We were doing stand-up, both of us. Francis was doing.
Oh wow, you married a comic too.
Well, no, I married a comic. No, I'm talking about Francis.
I thought you said my wife. I thought you said my wife. She did stand.
Yeah, sorry, I maybe misspoke. No, maybe Francis is my wife at this point. No, what was happening was basically both Francis and I were working extremely hard.
Yeah.
And by the time lockdown came, even though my wife and I have a beautiful relationship, it was kind of like lockdown sort of, I wouldn't say it saved our marriage, but our son certainly wouldn't have been born without it. Do you know what I mean? Because suddenly I was like, oh, Oh, I'm at home now, and maybe I should actually spend some time with this person that I claim to love.
So either I misheard you or you referred to him as your wife. In either case, one of us is not looking very good here.
Well, it's probably me.
It's right.
Yeah, it's
probably not. So for people that that don't know you, don't know your work, can you just talk a little bit about your sort of childhood and into what got you into sort of the cultural, political thing that we're kind of in the mix of, and then we'll hit the issues of the day.
Well, the short version of it is I was born in the Soviet Union in the late 80s into a family that I was imbued from a very young age with stories of my ancestors, people who starved in the gulags for saying the wrong thing or who were really severely punished. My grandfather, the way I ended up in the UK is my parents, they were very wealthy for like 3 years. And in that time gap, they sent me to boarding school in England because my grandfather was there. And the reason my grandfather was there, that in the late 70s, early 80s, he criticized the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And he was immediately ostracized by his friends, fired from work. His wife was fired from work. His children, that's my father and my aunt, were kicked out of university for him making this one comment in private. And so when it came to living in the UK and doing stand-up, and I saw this climate that was happening where suddenly, it was very, very sudden, at least to me, because I wasn't paying that much attention. Suddenly words became this all-powerful thing that was to be treated with the utmost seriousness. And jokes could not be treated as jokes. If you made a joke that people didn't like, they couldn't just say, oh, that's not funny. Now you had to be punished. And in addition to that, you know, the one thing that I really, as an immigrant to the UK, I found very unpleasant was this idea that all our social problems, whether that's, you know, Brexit or Trump or whatever, can be explained by claiming that people are racist. And that's when I came across your show, actually, because I was trying to understand, because I'd lived in England for most of my teenage life and all my adult life. And I'm a dark-skinned immigrant. I experienced racism once or twice, but I never felt like it was a racist country. And so when a referendum like Brexit, where I voted Remain, by the way, you couldn't vote for Hillary in 2016, and Francis did too as well, we both did. When the explanation for that was being offered to us was that half the country was, I was just like, no, this is BS. This isn't true. And that, I think, is part of the reason that we really started to look at these things, because we felt our own industry change. And also we looked around at society and we just went, something is off. We're being told a bunch of lies, and quite nasty ones as well. You know, for Francis particularly, you know, his father is a evil straight white man who married a woman from Venezuela in the 80s, when that was not the done thing in England. And he voted Brexit, and he was suddenly demonized. And that picture of our societies is so inaccurate that it was very frustrating. And I think trigonometry is partly born out of that frustration.
Right. It's interesting because I wasn't talking about Brexit that much at first, but then because of the Trump situation here, I started having a couple people from the UK and some Americans that were talking about Brexit. And then suddenly I had all these people in the UK watching, and I was like, well, I didn't even intend that to happen. But there was definitely a connection between Brexit and the Trump thing, for sure.
There was, and the cultural forces that swirl around those issues are largely the same. Now, you guys do politics very differently to the way that we do, but fundamentally, the way I see it, it was a rebellion of the people. Whether it was channeled in the right way is a different conversation, but people, certainly in the UK, felt that a lot of their concerns were not only heard, but they weren't even being aired. And so that, I think, is why those two issues are very similar.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of mindless drivel, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.